Hey guys, welcome in. We're live here with the CFF site. I am Joe DeSalvo. It is week 6. I know there's a lot going on, guys. I'm gonna try to talk for a few minutes with the introduction. Try to give you a few of you guys some time to get on here. But certainly there's a lot going on. Week 6 already upon us here, and just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at in the season, we have 3 in-house college fantasy football leagues going on over at the CFF site. And right now, the unique setup is this. I decided to set it up. We ran with 20 teams in 3 different leagues. And we played a 5-week regular season, multiple matchups, 5 matchups per week. And the unique setup was we were going to go head-to-head matchups, 5 matchups per week. The 8 best teams at the end of those 5 weeks will earn a spot into the double elimination tournament, and that double elimination tournament is upon us. And so now the top 8 teams through the first 5 weeks of the season will battle it out, double elimination format, tournament style through the end of the year. And the winner will put together some prizes for the winners of the league, and I'll probably put together some t-shirts like you guys see here. So be expecting that to the league winners of the 3 in-house leagues that we have set up. And let me go ahead and give a shout out to Charles Lee, Matt Berry, and Tyler Landers, the 3 #1 seeds in each one of those leagues. You guys posted the best record through the first 5 weeks of the college fantasy football season. So props to you guys. Let's see if you can hold on to that top spot now as we move into a double elimination format. Hey guys, welcome in. I see a few of you all are joining in. I did push back the time this week. I did get a lot of emails to try to accommodate some schedules. So I'm hoping we get more participation this week at the end of the show. I'm willing to stay on as long as we can to answer some of the questions. I'll open up the Twitter. I'll open up the chat here as well. Hold off on those questions until the end of the show, and we'll go ahead and try to dive into some of those and address those here before we get off the air. I know there's a big game tonight. Louisville playing at North Carolina State. 2 of the premier players at their position going head-to-head tonight. Lamar Jackson, quarterback, Louisville. Jalen Samuels, do-it-all back, tight end, / whatever you want to call him, over at NC State. I happen to think this could be Lamar Jackson's biggest game of the year. So maybe we'll get updates as the game goes on. I'll check my feed and see if I can provide you guys with some updates as we do the show. Yeah, I mentioned at the top of the show, week 6 is here. We have the in-house leagues. There's a couple of things I want to touch on before we go ahead and jump into the player rankings. I want to address a few questions that you guys have had over the weeks, and it has to do with players that are listed as questionable, doubtful, players coming off and player Lamar bomb. No, look, here's the thing. Whenever there's weeks coming up, guys, or players during the week that listed as questionable, I said this last week, if they haven't practiced or you haven't gotten a clear-cut idea of what to expect for the weekend by Thursday, you really need to make preparations, and you really need to make preparations to look elsewhere at that position. And you know what? Here's what I'll throw out at you, because this is what happened last week. This was the situation that occurred with Ronald Jones, A.J. Brown, and Mike Boone, just to name 3. And for every Ronald Jones who we find out he starts right before kickoff and that he's going to play, there's an A.J. Brown or a Mike Boone that doesn't do well. I happen to think that you're better. I can live with sitting Ronald Jones on the bench and finding another player that may have given me 3/4 of his production than starting an A.J. Brown against Alabama defense that was nicked up, and Mike Boone coming off of an ankle injury where he had already missed time, and getting 2-3 points out of those guys. So here's my philosophy, guys. I do this all the time, and I'm doing it this week. I'm doing it this week with Brandon Wimbush, who I actually like, had he been healthy, to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback this week. I went ahead and picked up a player. I'll mention that player later in the show. He's in the start bench piece, but I'm teaming him up with Lamar Jackson this week in a 2-quarterback full FBS league. So that's my thing on questionable players. And then one more thing that I'm coming in, a lot of questions about players. We're getting to the time of the year now. Here we are in October, where some of these players are really close in the rankings, and I know Joe's. You guys always preface the emails. Joe, I know what you say. You go by the rankings first, but you guys, and I can't tell you how many times wide receivers have come in and guys have emailed me. You have my receivers ranked 24, 25, 26. It happens all the time. Here's one thing that I'll suggest to you as we get into October and late October in the next few weeks. If there's players that are really close, you have to take into account that we do these rankings. We put them together Monday, Tuesday, tighten them up, finalize them Wednesday evening, get them out to you. Sometimes we forget a guy, we go back, edit it in. For instance, if you missed, we did add the Virginia receivers in there and Calvin Ridley, Alabama wide receiver, into the rankings. If you hadn't seen that, go back, refresh the page. You'll get the update on that as well. But sometimes we don't finalize these rankings till Wednesday. Well, guys, we're not meteorologists, right? You have to keep an eye on the weather. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing on one guy from another on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning by just looking at the weather sometimes. We're coming up to that part of the year. Something to consider, and I want to throw it out there before we get into hot and heavy into the rankings. One thing that I'll tease out there, what's coming on later on in this show, is I have I want to share with you, and this is why I love doing the show. I can kind of bring you inside my mind, my head, how we do these rankings, how I look at the rankings, how I interpret them, how I compare one player to the other. I have a real great example of that from two receivers off of the same team that I'll kind of break down for you, how I put them and position them into the rankings, and then also as well, in the start bench piece, there's a player that I want to focus on this week, and I really want to break down the way that I diagnose a quality start. Somebody that I can get behind and have confidence in a weekly start, because I've told you guys this before. I don't like to throw out the obvious names in the start bench piece. I don't like to list a top 10 player, sometimes even a top 15 player, unless they've completely off the radar and jumped into the rankings this particular week. I want to share my thoughts with you of how I diagnosed one of my start calls this week on a player that I actually picked up off the waiver wire and will have in my starting lineup this week. So I've got two players on the start bench, on the start piece, that I picked up this week and will have in my week 6 lineup, and I want to share with you guys those two players coming up at the end of the show. So with that being said, before we get to the start bench and before we get to your week 6 questions, we're going to go ahead and dive into the quarterback rankings. And look, guys, no surprise, Lamar Jackson here kicking off against North Carolina State tonight. Lamar Jackson sitting there at the top of the list right now. Lamar Jackson, the top fantasy player in all of college fantasy football. It may not matter what your system is. Lamar Jackson is probably sitting at the top at the points lead. Eric Dungey right now, a little bit of a surprise. I had Eric Dungey very high earlier in the year. I thought this would be around the time where he fizzled out a little bit. But guess what? Those games against LSU, the matchups coming up maybe against Florida State, they don't look as daunting as they did when we looked at the preseason schedule. So props to many of you that have held on to Eric Dungey. It looks like you'll be rewarded. I like Eric Dungey this week in a home game against Pitt. And remember, last year, they played a game that was like more points scored in that game than college basketball games. So maybe you get a repeat performance this week. I doubt it, but if you can get anything close to that, you'll take it, right? Nick Shimonek, Texas Tech, playing at Kansas. J.T. Barrett playing Maryland. Baker Mayfield, Will Grier. Kelly Bryant against Wake Forest. That might be a little bit of a surprise. Wake Forest looks tougher than what anyone anticipated. Look what they did with Florida State last week. We can argue whether or not Florida State is the team we thought they were. Obviously, they lost DeAndre Francois. But I think Wake Forest will kind of give them fits for a couple of quarters. But guys, how consistent has Kelly Bryant been operating that Clemson offense? And I'll tell you right now, Kelly Bryant has just been an absolute beast for you guys in college fantasy football this year. Of course, he's not been the 40, 50-point guy, but he's given you great consistency week in and week out. And that factors into these rankings, right? I've said it before. I'll say it again. There's a lot of things that go into these rankings that you really have to consider. Historical performance. You have to consider your confidence level in a guy moving forward. You have to consider the momentum that they have. And of course, you have to consider the matchups. So many factors that play into ranking college fantasy football, that quite frankly, you guys that are watching this show, I know you laugh at your friends that play NFL fantasy football and don't play college, because when they say they do their homework, it's not 1/10 of what we do right here. And I do have a player coming up that I want to mention in the running backs when we get to that point that a lot of people are high on, and I'm not so high this week, and we'll get there as well. But I mentioned Kelly Bryant, Zach Abey. I wish he'd have had a lot more points last week against, I think it was that Tulsa game that they played. Started a little late, but he came on strong, finished with 30-something points, maybe even 40 in some leagues. Jalen Hurts, great matchup at Texas A&M, and then Luke Falk, Sam Darnold, and then Brandon Wimbush right there. And I have to tell you, I'm having doubts on whether or not Brandon Wimbush played. I know you guys are reading that he's probable. I have Brandon Wimbush. I've been teaming him with Lamar Jackson. I'm telling you, I am sitting Brandon Wimbush this week, even though I think if he plays a full game, he will be rock solid. I just am not going to take a chance on a player that is on the fringe of having an injury that may get pulled early, because remember, in a couple of weeks from now, they have a matchup against USC. Way more important matchup for the Irish. That game, they need Wimbush healthy. He may not play the entire game this week. And then you've got Browning, Woodside, Nick Stevens, big weeker for him last week. I teamed him up with Michael Gallup in a St. Jude's charity league that I'm running, where you pick a lineup once a week on guys that you feel are just going to, blow the lid off. You only get to pick one player one time all season long. Last week, I took the connection of Nick Stevens, Michael Gallup, and I also took the connection of Jake Browning, Dante Pettis last week. They tore it up for me, guys. But Nick Stevens there at 15. Thomas Sirk, I think he's going to have another solid performance against a Temple defense that is not as good as I thought. Many of us thought that they were. And then there, number 17, Brian Sheriffs, and that's a little bit of a surprise, but look at the opponent, guys, Memphis, and I think Brian Sheriffs is a sneaky play this week. I've got more on him a little later. I'll try not to get too excited right now. Trace McSorley, Penn State at Northwestern, Kenny Hill, TCU playing West Virginia. I like Kenny Hill, but that running game is crazy good right now with Darius Anderson. They're going ahead and get Kyle Hicks back this week. I've got Finley up there as well. Finley right now has the Wolfpack in the red zone in the first quarter, so it looks like he may put points up on the board right now. And then obviously Chad President, we gave you Justice Hansen last week. We had confidence that he was going to play this week. I do like Arian Worthman. I think Arian Worthman is a sneaky play this week against Navy. Navy's given up a lot of yards. I think Arian Worthman has a breakout game against Navy this week. And then number 25, Riley Ferguson. He hasn't had the season that many of us have quite expected yet. And then look at number 26, guys, Matt Linehan, Idaho. Look who they're playing, UL Lafayette. Right now, it's like Christmas time if you have a fantasy player going against the UL Lafayette defense. This week, it's Idaho. So I think it could be all hands on deck with quarterback Matt Linehan. You got the receivers, Anunwar, you've got Sannon, you've got the running back Saunders and Duckworth. I think all of those guys are legitimate, at least flex options in deep FBS leagues. And then look at Jamar Smith climbing up the charts for us at number 29, gets UAB this week. That could be a guy that outplays his ranking. He's sneaking up the charts. I gave you Teddy Veal last week. I told you put your eyes on the Louisiana Tech offense. They're headed in the right direction, and I think they're going to continue to head on up as we get into the midseason mark. Daniel Santa Catarina, Northern Illinois versus Kent State. He will start this week. I think he puts up solid numbers for you if you can grab him. Malik Rozier right here. Rozier has been solid this year. He does get and play a road game at Florida State. Something to consider here, guys. Consider the weather. I'm down here in the South. I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana, right? And I could tell you that tropical storm / hurricane's headed this way. It's not supposed to be super strong. I don't know if it really affects much, but there probably will be at least a lot of wind, if not some wet weather, possibly in Tallahassee on Saturday. So keep that in mind. And then Mackenzie Milton, 33, Central Florida at Cincinnati. Some people have emailed me, said that's too low. Maybe you're right. I told you last week I wasn't super high on Ferguson and Super Ferguson on Ferguson and Milton. Milton had a good game. He wasn't exactly a superstar. Solid again. I think they play defense. I think they run the ball. And I think he makes some throws in the air. I think he's a solid start if you play in a 2-quarterback league, sitting there at number 34. And I do think rounding out the top 40 right there, you've got Kent Myers, Brandon Dawkins, Tyler Rogers a little low down at 37, road game at App State. And I'm telling you right now, guys, New Mexico State might be one of those games that I pick against the spread. I gave you Pitt last week. I've got 2 games this week that I'm going to give you, and maybe I'll hit on one of those for you or both of them as well. And then the surprise, I think, Peyton Bender at 46, Kansas playing Texas Tech. Some people might think that that might be a little low, but here's my take on Peyton Bender right now. He's been a little inconsistent so far this year. Up, down, up, down, up, down. I don't like that when it comes to putting a guy into my fantasy lineup. Like I said, I like consistency, I like a good confidence level, and I like someone that has momentum. I don't know if Peyton Bender has that right now, but we have him ranked number 46 as well. And so that guy, that's going to round out the top 50 guys. I think if there's anybody after that to keep your eye on, just sleepers, I think you got to look at John Wasink, the quarterback at Western Michigan playing Buffalo. He's had some good weeks consecutively. He's got some momentum going on his side. So I really think you've got to take him, and I think you've got to keep an eye on him. Kellen Mond way down there at 84. I'm really curious to see what Kellen Mond does. I have a feeling that's going to be a very difficult game. True Frosh going up against Alabama, even though he's at home. Alabama and Clemson right now just look like they're the 2 best teams in college football. I don't see anybody stopping them. They're steamrolling with people right now. I think Alabama runs through Texas A&M, and I'm keeping Kellen Mond on the bench this week. I don't even think, yeah, maybe he is on the bench list. But a couple of quarterback things that I want to touch on. Oregon quarterback, Burmaster Alley, we're not sure who it's going to be. I think you need to stay away from that right now. Explore other options. And David Blow, the quarterback at Purdue, looks like he is going to play. He's had 2 good days of practice. But the question is, what's the rotation going on over there? So if you're in a Big Ten league, be careful of that. But that just about right there, guys, wraps up the quarterbacks. And we're going to transition over to the running back position, guys. And at the top, no surprise, Rashad Penny, Bryce Love, Saquon Barkley, 1, 2, 3. Put them in a hat, pick them. That's your top guy. I just love Rashad Penny. Probably a little bias here. I'm going to show some love to the group of 5 teams, but I just think Penny is an absolute monster. Bryce Love, what he's doing right now is just off the charts. Matter of fact, they're Love and Penny 1, 2 in the rankings for rushing yards in the nation going into this week. And then Saquon Barkley doing it all at Penn State. Quite frankly, I'm a little worried about Barkley's durability at the end of the year. Let's see if he holds up. He's getting a lot of touches. In my opinion, I'm really nervous, not for just Saquon Barkley's fantasy owners, but for Saquon Barkley's health. He's just getting so many touches. I'm wondering if he could stay healthy. Devin Singletary really coming on over at FAU. They've really figured out that they've got to get him the ball. It's not so much about the quarterbacks, right? They've got to get Devin Singletary some more touches. Royce Freeman, asterisk at number 5. We've been told he's probable. I'm nervous about that play. I'm so nervous that I ranked Kenny Benoit and Tony Brooks James of Oregon playing home against Washington State. This is something we're going to have to monitor in the next 48 hours or so, guys, because I just don't have a lot of confidence right now leaning one way or the other. We'll see what happens. But you got to remember, Freeman came out the game last week. He has to be at least to some extent dinged up. So I am a little nervous. If you had to play a 1B in that offense, I'm going with Kenny Benoit. Now that they've made the change at quarterback, I expect Oregon to have to run the ball a lot, this week. But you know what will dictate that? What will dictate that will depend on what Washington State does going into Oregon this week. And if Washington State plays the way they've been playing the last few weeks, you could be looking at Washington State going into Eugene and beating the Ducks pretty easily. We'll see the quarterback play that the Ducks get. Jonathan Taylor at 8, Myles Gaskin 7, Ronald Jones at 6, all solid plays. Dontrell Hilliard number 9, and I will just say this, I've got Dontrell Hilliard in the start piece. I said I don't necessarily like to put obvious guys in there, but I feel so strong about Dontrell Hilliard. He was a guy that I sent out in an email a couple of weeks ago saying, listen, here's a guy that I would love to have from now to the end of the year because I think he's going to be so steady for you guys. And he got out of the gate fast last week, broke off like an 80-yard, 78-yard touchdown run on the first touch of the game, and really was on cruise control from that point forward. Darius Anderson, TCU versus West Virginia. Let me go ahead and touch on this. A lot of questions coming in on the TCU running back spot, and here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm reading, here's what I'm finding out, guys. Kyle Hicks is going to play in the game. No doubt about it, he's back, he's going to play. But in the same breath, you also have to realize this, and this is what the coach said. He is going to get touches. He won't necessarily be carrying the load. He has to be eased back into the game. This is, I'm reading the tea leaves, and that's what we have to do sometimes with college fantasy football. This is how I am diagnosing that statement. There's no sense of rushing Kyle Hicks back. There's no sense of giving him 25 carries in the game because he doesn't need to get 25 carries in the game because Darius Anderson's been our #1 back and the best back we've had on the roster all year anyway. So that is my thought on Gary Patterson's comments about Kyle Hicks. Darius Anderson is going to get 1 snaps. He's going to and should get the most carries. He has deserved and earned the right to get most carries. But it also has to be pointed out that Hicks is proven, and Hicks is a very reliable #2 option. But I think in a big game at home against West Virginia, Darius Anderson is going to be another monster this week. That run game has been phenomenal, and I don't see Darius Anderson underperforming much than being a top 20 pick this week. I like Anderson. Get him in your lineup, even with Kyle Hicks back. And look at Kerryon Johnson, another one we've got to explore. The Auburn running back position. Go take a look at the log of Kerryon Johnson when he's played. Guys, I'm telling you right now, why wouldn't have Petway touched the ball more last week? I really believe, and I was wrong. I thought Petway would be the guy that would be the workhorse. It looks like it is going to be Johnson. It looks like he is going to get the most touches in that offense. And I'm telling you this week, against an Ole Miss offense, Kerryon Johnson is going to have another big week. So get him in your lineup. And then right there, Deosame St. Juste for Hawaii has been a yardage guy all year. Lexington Thomas, Philip Lindsay, Josh Adams, Notre Dame at North Carolina. I think Josh Adams is going to be good to go, guys. I don't necessarily think he's the guy that's going to be banged up much, but the backups will be if Brandon Wimbush doesn't play. Or if he does, you got to be careful with that injury that he's got. I think they lean on Josh Adams in that running game. They're obviously going to do it. They've been leaning on the running game all year. Josh Adams is a solid play this week in a road game at North Carolina. And I'm going to go on record by saying this. I think Notre Dame needs Wimbush. I don't think they win this game easily without Wimbush. Going on the road to Chapel Hill, it's just my gut. I think they need Wimbush. But I'm a little nervous of how it plays out, so I'm going with another guy instead. D'Angelo Brewer, 16. He's a volume guy. You've got to get him in. Darius Geis, the running back LSU playing at Florida. Boy. I made some suggestions in the email. I would not even have any arguments. I would not have any quarrels if any of you wanted to dump and move on from Darius Geis, not let him go, but to trade him. Put together some offers, sell him up big time, and see if you can trade him. I would have no issues with trading Darius Geis because up to this point, he hasn't really given you anything the last couple of weeks anyway. So if you've got a really good team, try to sell Geis and get and really shore up your roster somewhere else because I have a lot of concerns for that LSU offense. And this week is no different, playing a road game at LSU. Ito Smith, number 18. I actually think this is a tough road for Ito Smith playing a UTSA defense that's pretty darn good. Watch out for their next game against UTEP. Ito Smith is going to be a monster, but I do have concerns this week, and I will go on record by saying this. They are not giving Ito Smith enough touches at Southern Miss. They're not doing it. Ito Smith was our preseason #1 running back. He has performed when he's getting enough touches. They are not getting him enough touches. Get Ito the ball. Give him 15 to 20 carries a game. Get him 5 to 7 receptions a game. Get his 150 to 200 all-purpose yards. Guys, I don't know. They have to give Ito Smith the ball more. Jalen Rhodes, that matchup with Southern Miss, UTSA, and then Terry Swanson there rounding up the top 20 At number 22, some names to throw out, right? Khalil Herbert, the running back, Kansas, playing Texas Tech. Now, I have some emails this week coming in. Why is he so low? Joe, have you looked at what he's done the last 2 games? Here's my answer. Yes, I have. He's been an absolute beast. I'll give you that. Here's my take. I'm not comfortable riding a wave of Kansas players. I'm just not. I mentioned that earlier with Peyton Bender. Just when you think a team like that has it figured out and they go ahead and Herbert is putting up these monster yards and they're playing Texas Tech and you look at it and you say, that's a no-brainer. That's a top 10 pick. This is where they bite you. This is where you got to be careful. So this is what I'll say about Khalil Herbert. I think he has a good game. I don't know if he has a great game. Really interesting. And here's one of my here's my lock of the week. And I'll throw this out right now. The over-under Texas Tech Kansas is set at 80. I like the under this week. That's my bet, like I gave you Pitt last week minus the points against Rice. I say take the under in the Texas Tech Kansas game, and last I checked, it was set at 80. Number 24, Mark Walton, Miami playing at Florida State. Like I mentioned, that game could be affected by weather. Jordan Huff, Northern Illinois versus Kent State. Jordan Huff's coming on here. Mac plays starting. Watch out for Jordan Huff. A.J. Uyech really separated himself from Dorian Brown over at Ohio. He works into the top 30 this week. And then Aaron Duckworth, 28, Idaho running back playing UL Lafayette. Watch out. Duckworth could be a name that surprises his ranking this week going against the UL Christmas Lafayette defense. Justin Crawford, number 29, playing at TCU, and then Nick Chubb rounding out the top 30. Andy Davidson, solid last week. We had him in the start piece. Darnell Wolfark was out. I'm not sure if he'll be out again. Last I saw, he was questionable. If so, Davidson, another nice matchup against Rice this week. And let me go ahead and touch on a running back position, Ohio State. A lot of emails again. Guys, here's some things that I wish I could do. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you what's going to happen over at Ohio State. Sometimes I just throw my arms up in the air when we have it, just when we thought we had it figured out, we don't. And that's the same thing that happened. I mean, look, Dobbins, Weber came in and scored a couple of touchdowns, 2 or 3 touchdowns as a matter of fact. And now I'm wondering, you know what? Is Dobbins going to be the guy between the 20s and Weber the guy in the red zone? I don't know. We'll see. It's unfortunate for all of our fantasy owners because we can't get any clarity. I wish we knew what was going on. And that's why you can see how it's valuable to have a workhorse that's a number 1 back in an offense that doesn't have a surefire number 2 guy. That's why it's great to have a Barkley, and it's great to have a Singletary, and it's great to have a Bryce Love, because you don't have to worry about whether or not they're competing with a 1A and 1B situation. That's my take on the Ohio State running backs. You want my honest opinion? Trade the son of a guns away and let's give somebody else the headache, and you go ahead and take the security of what you're going to get every week and get yourself a more secure player on a weekly basis. Demarie Crockett at number 37, Missouri at Kentucky. That Kentucky run defense is better than what most people think. Be careful of that play of Demarie Crockett. Malik Davis, running back Florida, playing home against LSU. Wasn't even named the starter on this week's depth chart, but I have to tell you, Malik Davis, at least 90 yards rushing 3 consecutive weeks. He's got to be the guy at Florida playing LSU. You got to get him in. Let's say Tim McVeigh. Here's a name to watch. I mentioned Arian Worthman at the top of the show in the quarterback piece. Watch Tim McVeigh this week. I think he takes his game to the next level this week playing Navy. I like that game to have a lot of offense. And then one more running back, a couple of more running back situations I'll touch on, man. And there's so many that we can go, so many routes we can go. Jalen Moore, running back, Appalachian State. Jalen Moore is probably the one guy out there right now that the most fantasy owners, including myself, are holding on to. And I think you're holding on for this week. Because if you don't get any clarity between Moore and Upshaw this week, you've got to cut bait. And maybe you take the risk of letting somebody go and someone else picking them up because one of those 2 guys get hurt. But we have to see separation in the Appalachian State backfield this weekend, or you've got to move on. I know I will be, and I'm telling you it will hurt. Jalen Moore and Lamar Jackson were my 2 keepers this year, and Jalen Moore has given me absolutely 0. This was the week I was holding on. They've had a week to get healthy. If he doesn't separate himself this week, guys, you let him go. But I have a little faith that he has a bounce back week. I did put him there at 45. My confidence level is shot in Jalen Moore. Mike Boone, Cincinnati running back, still working his way back from injury, playing a tough defense this week in Central Florida, even though he's at home. I think you've got to be careful with him. I drafted Devwah Whaley. I still had him on my roster. I finally let him go. I don't feel it. Chase Hayden getting carries. I'm telling you right now, I let Devwah Whaley go. Is it a mistake? We'll find out. I don't think I made a mistake. Let's see. A couple of more. Justin Stockton sitting at 51. Texas Tech playing at Kansas. Texas Tech offense, who may have lost Kiki QT for a little bit of time. We don't know. He's questionable. That's a player right now that I have to tell you. I've gotten tons of emails. You have to make plans to not have QT in your lineup this week. If you have him, you've got to move on. You cannot risk putting him in there, saying he's going through warm-ups. And as a matter of fact, let me bring that to another point. Guys, I can tell you this right now. When it comes to our Twitter, we get a lot of stuff on game day about a player leading up until kickoff. I do not really like to send a lot of tweets out that says a guy is warming up with this person or warming up with the first team, second team. He's taking snaps here or there right before kickoff for a guy that's questionable, because I don't want to steer you the wrong way. I don't want to give you the impression that the guy is going to start or play extended snaps just because he's participating in warm-ups. I would rather you move on, make plans, get points elsewhere, than end up in a situation where he warms up, plays 2 snaps, realize he couldn't play, and then you're stuck getting a goose egg at that position. So that's my take on why we do not send out a lot of player news the mornings of games unless we're absolutely confident we feel good, which is what we did with Justin Hansen last night. So that pretty much takes care of the running backs, guys. I'll go ahead and throw some long shots out there for you guys. I think, before I move on, let's address one that I've gotten a lot of emails on, especially if you had the extended rankings. A lot of emails coming in for Indiana running back Morgan Ellison, telling me, Joe, great matchup. Charleston Southern playing Indiana. Why are you not on the Morgan Ellison bandwagon? And here's why. Because I've gotten one game against Georgia Southern to show me what Morgan Ellison can do. And they do play Charleston Southern. And I have no doubt that Indiana is going to win this game. But I'm not quite sure that Morgan Ellison is going to have another 25 carry game. Who's to say they don't just break out 21, 28, nothing, and he's even going to get that many carries? I think you really have to consider sometimes, just like the elite players when they play these small opponents, you've got to be careful, because once when the league gets too quick, or once when the league gets too big, too fast, the scale back. And Cole just got some carries last week, and I'm interested to see how that plays out. So that's why Morgan Ellison is down there at the bottom of the list. There's a guy that I really like this week. I added it on the extended rankings for you guys that have the exclusive email. You have my player this week. Look next to Morgan Ellison. He's one player listed above him. That guy, keep an eye on this week. Breakout game. Get him on your roster before he hits the waiver wire. I just have a gut feeling on that guy this week. So, guys, that's going to round out the running backs. We've been on here now for about 33 minutes. We're going to get into the receivers. I'm going to go into the start bench, and then I'll go ahead and jump into your questions. Thank you guys for coming in again this week. And number one, I mentioned this in the exclusive email. I like Michael Gallup from here on out. To me, he's the number one fantasy receiver from here on out. Michael Gallup is my top guy. Steve Ishmael with the track record right now. Deontay Burnett came back last week against Washington State. I expect him to be even healthier this week against an Oregon State defense that has just struggled against the pass. And that's why Sam Darnold and Deontay Burnett are so high in the rankings. A lot of questions coming in about Deontay Johnson, wide receiver Toledo. I'll tell you right now, Deontay Johnson, wide receiver Toledo, may be one of the more underrated fantasy players in college fantasy football this year. If you get a minute, just go check his stat line through the first 4 games this year. He's only caught 4 passes in like 3 games, and he's had like 8 receptions in another. Go look at his stat line and tell me that that guy has not been consistent in that offense. Logan Woodside now is getting more consistent. And you know what? Defenses do still have to concentrate on Cody Thompson. I do think the matchup against Eastern Michigan is a little tougher matchup, but Toledo has played tough teams already. They played Miami. So how much tougher are you going to get than that? Eastern Michigan is no tougher than those teams. And now all of a sudden Toledo gets Eastern Michigan at home in week 6. So I do like Deontay Johnson and Cody Thompson. Cam Phillips for Virginia Tech. DJ Moore, Maryland's been so consistent. Even though they have a road game at Ohio State, Maryland has gone on the road to Minnesota, gone on the road to Texas, and DJ Moore has still been productive. You still have to like him. Dante Pettis, Washington versus Cal, coming off his 3-touchdown performance last week. They're going to need him against Cal this week, a Cal team that's respectable, not great, but respectable. David Sills, the go-to guy, should be targeted frequently. West Virginia at TCU. And then Thompson, Cedric Wilson, John Ursua, Hawaii, playing at Nevada. I think he's going to have a lot of targets this week. Keyshawn Johnson made me proud last week. He was my sleeper in the preseason fantasy guide, and I warned you guys you just had to get past the Alabama and Washington games, and then all of a sudden last week, you got out of that gauntlet. He gives you 3 touchdowns. Keyshawn Johnson, another sweet matchup playing at San Jose State. Get him in your lineup, top 15 pick. Ty Lee, Middle Tennessee, should find some more offense this week against a struggling FIU team. I like Ty Lee this week, and he was a producer last week. Anthony Miller, schizophrenic Anthony Miller. Now, all of a sudden, we've got to worry about what Memphis is going to do. But remember what Connecticut, what East Carolina just did to Connecticut a couple of weeks ago. I think Anthony Miller bounces back this week. Steven Sims, Kansas playing Texas Tech. Steven Sims is actually the guy that I like in that matchup for the Kansas offense playing Texas Tech. Tavares Martin, Darren Carrington, Utah, I still think is a top 20 pick even without Tyler Huntley. They've had a week off to prepare without having Huntley now, so I do think that favors Carrington. Jaleel Scott at 18. If they were not playing at Appalachian State, I would like him a little bit more, but I've got him at 18. And then Irvin Phillips coming off and caught 71 passes last week. Gets a matchup against Pitt this week. And then my man, Teddy Veal right there at number 20, cracks the top 20 for me this week, playing on the road at UAB. And then Greg Dortch, I'm going to touch on him, Wake Forest wide receiver playing at Clemson. Man, guys, he was just solid playing Florida State. If you play in a PPR league, there's no way you can leave Dortch on your bench, even though you're playing a game against Clemson. I think you've got to get Dortch in there in PPR leagues. Dylan Cantrell, I think he may take over as the top receiver this week, at least a go-to receiver in the red zone when they need a first down. I look for Cantrell not necessarily to lead the team in yardage, but he could lead the team in touchdown receptions and possibly receptions as well. And then rounding out the top 25, you've got James Gardner, Miami of Ohio, Sergio Bailey, Eastern Michigan, and then Trey Quinn, Lionel Bonner. Justin Hall, the youngster, Ball State playing at Akron. He's getting a lot of targets. I like him. And then we've got Marcus Sims in there at number 29, Gary Jennings at 40. Now, I mentioned at the top of the show, I was going to give you my thought process on how we compare wide receivers from certain teams in a head-to-head process. And I got an email this today, and I forgot who sent it to me. But thanks for sending the question in, because it led to this Gary Jennings versus Marcus Sims comparison. And here's what I'll say. Jennings' numbers have looked like they've been a little bigger with receptions and yardage this year. But here's the one thing that you have to keep in mind. First of all, Sims missed the first game of the year. The reason why I have Sims ranked higher this week than Jennings, first of all, Jennings scored a touchdown in week 1. Sims didn't even play that week. But from that point forward, Jennings has had more receptions than Sims, but Sims has had the better fantasy games. And here's why. Because he's been the big play guy. He's found the end zone. And here's my thought. If you have a guy that catches 4 passes for 75 yards and a touchdown, that's worth more than a guy that's going to catch 6 passes for 100 yards. Whether you play in a PPR or half PPR league, the guy who catches the touchdown is always worth more than the guy that's just going to give you receptions and yardage. And here's my thought process. If West Virginia scores a touchdown, odds are the guy scoring a touchdown, first of all, is probably either going to be the quarterback Will Grier, Justin Crawford, David Sills, and maybe even Kennedy McCoy, I would say, and Sims. those would be my 4 guys and 5 guys that I would say are likely to score a touchdown before Jennings will. So that's how I'd use the tiebreaker of Jennings versus Sims, is give me the guy that's more likely to find the end zone. And that's why Sims is rated higher than Jennings in our weekly lineups. And so I do have a couple of guys that I'll touch on as well. Jester Way came back, had a nice week. For Pitt, they get a matchup at Syracuse this week. I think you could feel comfortable with him. Penny Hart coming off of a solid lineup. Penny Hart's a guy that we've been targeting for 2 years. It would be nice to see him have 2 consecutive games. Great matchup at Coastal Carolina this week. Christian Kirk, right now, if I had to play one Texas A&M guy, it would just be Christian Kirk. That would be the one guy that I would play out of Texas A&M. I wouldn't start the quarterback, running backs, anybody else except Christian Kirk. I wouldn't even start the kicker. And then Cameron Batson, Texas Tech right there as well. I think you've got to put the 3 Tech receivers in there if QT doesn't play, because right now it could be a crapshoot of who has the biggest game out of Cantrell, Batson, and Willies. And I think if you have all 3 of those guys, you play in a deep league, flex positions, you've got to take a shot with those guys. That's just that's gonna be about it for the receivers, guys. I don't really want to go into too much. I do think the top half was worth mentioning. So, with that being said, I'm gonna kind of jump right into the start bench piece with you guys as we kind of transition here to the end of the show. Week 6 start bench. I've got 5 plays on the bench. I've got 4 plays on the starts, and like I said, I really want to diagnose one of these starts with you guys, so bear with me. I'm going to put you inside of my head on how I diagnose a start sometimes. First of all, with the bench list. No, we're going to start at the quarterback spot. Shea Patterson, quarterback Ole Miss, playing at Auburn. Now, you got to remember, Shea Patterson threw 9 touchdowns over the first 2 games of the season. He's only thrown 2 touchdown passes and 5 interceptions in the Ole Miss's last 2 games. And this week, Ole Miss travels to Auburn, faces a defense that's only allowing 11 points per game and 259 yards per game, which is 9th in the FBS. I think Shea Patterson, quarterback Ole Miss, is a Week 6 bench at Auburn. Running back Patrick Laird, Cal, playing at Washington. Now, and this is even for you Power 5 guys, too. Laird hasn't provided the spark that many fantasy owners were expecting after he exploded for 191 yards, 3 touchdowns in a Week 2 matchup against Weber State. Now, he's still the Bears' primary ball carrier, but don't expect a spike in production this week when Cal visits Washington. Patrick Laird, running back Cal, a Week 6 bench at Washington. And guys, the rest is running backs. The rest are running backs, and I mentioned this earlier when I was touching on the running backs. Demarie Crockett, running back Missouri, and boy, I had a lot of high hopes for Crockett this year. I never had him in elite status, but I thought he would be solid. And I'll tell you right now, Crockett and the entire Missouri offense has struggled ever since that season opening win against Missouri State, right? The sophomore back, now check this out. In that opening game, he totaled 202 yards and 2 touchdowns against Missouri State. In the last 3 games combined, Crockett has only totaled 192 yards and a touchdown. He had more in the season opening game than the last 3 games combined. And this week, Crockett faces an improved Kentucky defense that is only allowing 74 yards per game on the ground. Demarie Crockett, running back Missouri, at Kentucky, a Week 6 bench. Michigan State running backs at Michigan, right? Look, guys, there's 2 common sense plays this week. This is the first common sense play. Sit your Michigan State running backs. And this is for you Power 5 guys, because I don't think many of you FBS guys are playing Michigan State running backs, maybe even considering LJ Scott. But I kind of blew up LJ Scott 5 weeks ago, and hopefully you haven't touched him since. But Michigan boasts the nation's top defense against the run. They're only allowing 69 yards per game. They're only allowing 2.2 yards per rushing attempt. That's number 1 in the country. And they've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown. And even though the Spartans have a stable of running backs, none of them are likely to have success this weekend against Michigan. Sit your Michigan State running backs on the road. at Michigan. Michigan State running backs on the road at Michigan this week. And then here's the other no-brainer, guys. It's no-brainer every year, every week. It doesn't matter. If you've lived in this decade and you've been following our site for the last 7 years, you know that the cardinal rule is you never start a running back against the Alabama defense. And here's an interesting stat, even though I'm saying that, this week. The two backs at Texas A&M, Travion Williams and Keith Ford, they have combined for 686 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns, guys. That's a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns from those two people, from those two guys combined to keep them on the bench. However, it's never a wise choice to start a running back, like I said, against the Alabama defense. And the Alabama defense is only allowing 73 yards per game on the ground this year. That's second behind Michigan. They've only allowed one rushing touchdown in 5 games this year. Texas A&M running backs Keith Ford, Travion Williams, a Week 6 bench at home against Alabama. And we're going to get into the start bench. Guys, hold off on the questions. We're going to get there. Let me go ahead and clear this up, and I'm going to go ahead and get to you. I promise you. I'm not going anywhere till I get your questions taken care of. Week 6 start. Number 1 player that I have on the list, and here's a guy that I mentioned I picked up. I'm starting this week. Brian Sheriffs, the quarterback, Connecticut, playing Memphis. Now, even though Connecticut has lost 3 consecutive games, Sheriffs is providing them solid play at the quarterback position. He has thrown 2 or more touchdown passes in 3 consecutive games. He's topped 400 yards passing in back-to-back games. And tomorrow night, yes, Friday night's game, UConn hosts a Memphis team that has the 4th worst pass defense in the nation. They're allowing over 320 yards per game in the air, so the potential is there for another 400-point game and another 30-plus game from quarterback Brian Sheriffs. Connecticut playing at home tomorrow night at Memphis is a Week 6 start. Malik Davis, running back Florida, playing LSU. Davis wasn't, and I mentioned this earlier, Davis wasn't listed at the top of the depth chart this week for LSU's game, but he has been their most productive back over the last 3 weeks. He's topped the 90-yard mark in 3 consecutive games. He should get another heavy workload against an LSU defense that has struggled. Troy's Jordan Chun tore him up last week. I expect Malik Davis in the Florida running game to have a solid outing at home against LSU this week. Get Malik Davis in your Week 6 lineup, especially if you have a play in a Power 5 league. Here's 2 guys that I'm really excited about this week. One guy I'm super excited. He's, like I mentioned, he's in our top 10. I usually don't get excited over these guys if they're listed that high because it's kind of obvious. But I'm telling you guys, Dontrell Hilliard, running back Tulane, playing Tulsa. He goes into this Week 6 matchup, right? He's topped 100 yards rushing in back-to-back games. He's scored a touchdown in all 4 games this year. And fantasy owners, I'm going to tell you right now, you should have high expectations for him this week because he's facing the worst rush defense in the nation. Tulsa is allowing over 319 yards per game on the ground. They're allowing 6.7 yards per rush. Both of those are by far the worst stats in the nation this week. You've got to get Dontrell Hilliard, running back Tulane, in your lineup. He is a Week 6 start, no questions asked. Don't even send me any questions with Dontrell Hilliard in it over the next 48 hours. Get him in your lineup. And here's another one, guys. Last one, and I'm going to go ahead and take your questions. Here's a Week 6 start, and I'm going to tell you how I diagnosed it, start a little bit, and I'll put this up on the website later so you can go back and review it. Ronquavian Tarver, Utah State wide receiver, playing Colorado State. Now he's been good, but is he good enough to get into your lineup this week? But here's what I'll tell you. This is what you have to consider, and follow with me on this if you can, and if not, like I said, I'll put it up on the site. But this is how I look at these start benches every week. Utah State's lost 2 games this year, convincingly, right? They've lost at Wisconsin and at Wake Forest. No shames in those losses. Tarver's caught 2 passes, 8 yards at Wisconsin, 5 passes, 35 yards at Wake Forest. They lost 59-10, 46-10. They were routed. He's caught, in the other 3 games that they've won, he has caught at least one touchdown pass, and he's had at least 5 receptions in every one of those games. 7 for 75 and a touchdown, 5 for 42 and a touchdown, 6 for 76 and a touchdown. In all of those games in which they won, 2 of those 3, they've won by at least 35 points. And last week's game against BYU, they won by 16. Here's the key. You kind of have to analyze game by game per player. They play Colorado State this week. I don't expect them to be blown out, and I don't expect them to blow out Colorado State. I expect them to actually maybe even lose to Colorado State, but I think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game, and I think Kent Myers is going to have to look for Tarver frequently. Now, like I said, you have to break these down every week, and I know what you're thinking. You know, guys, I'm going to tell you this. I look at the top 100 to 120 players. I look at their game log every week. Every one of the top 100 to 120 players. And I know what you're thinking out there. Joe, I don't have time to do that. I mean, I know you don't. That's why I do it. That's why the site's here. That's why you're here. And that's why you're going to put Ronquavian Tarver in your Week 6 lineup, because the CFF site has done their homework and tells you that Ronquavian Tarver is a start at home against Colorado State in Week 6. So that's it, guys. That wraps up the rankings. That kind of puts you in my head a little bit on how I compare players head to head, how we kind of compare and kind of break down some start benches. So, you know, if you have any questions, I'll see if I have any that have come through here on Twitter. But if you have any, shoot away. I saw the chat box pop up over here a little earlier. There we go. Here's some right here. Can Marcus Marion be elite 3-quarterback league with my friends' crazy rules? Yeah, I think he can. I think it's a good matchup for them at San Jose State. I think if you have Marcus McMaryion, you've got to take a chance on him in a 3-quarterback league. I definitely do. Power 5 league, 2 quarterbacks. Taquan Marshall by loss. Herbert, need a quarterback for this week. Pretty slam pickings. Any thoughts on Steven Johnson against Mizzou? If the pickings is slim, I would say that you have to. If you are not sure, you know, kind of run a list, get a list together. And this is what I tell a lot of you guys to do if you have, especially if you have the exclusive email. When you send me an email telling me, look, pickings are slim, can you give me one guy that you think's a sleeper this week? Give me a list of some guys that you think give me some comparisons. Give me a list of 8-10 guys on the waiver wire, and I'll do the best that I can to isolate one over the other and tell you my reasoning for why I picked that guy. It's really hard in that situation to tell you what to do because I'm not sure what you have out there compared to Steven Johnson. But if you're in a pinch, you have to go for it. But I think if you're going to get anything out of that Kentucky offense, you're going to get most of the production from the running game. The question that just came in, Drew Brown or McMaryion. You know, good question this week. I think right now with the way that Hawaii is running the ball, I don't necessarily think that McMaryion is a bad play. I think I would be more willing, and look, I say this before, sometimes you got to go off the rankings. You have to take the rankings for face value, and sometimes you got to use your gut. If you're in a 3-quarterback league, guys, and you're going Drew Brown, McMaryion, sometimes I got to say you got to take the matchup that's most favorable at that point. At a quarterback 3 and take the shot with the high ceiling guy. I'm going to go ahead and roll with McMaryion right there in your lineup as a quarterback 3. So let me go ahead and check Twitter, guys. Looks like I may have one coming in. And that's it. That's it. That's all we have, guys. So, look, first of all, thank you all for coming in. I know it's taken a while. And just when I said that Lamar Jackson was probably going to have the biggest week of the year, I'm looking at a 0-0 game in the second quarter. I see many of you are still on here. Thanks for staying on the whole time. Yes, I know. Trust me, I'm sweating it out too. But this is what I'll say. Here's my last bit of advice before you hop off. Don't go anywhere because this is really big. Guys, here's the deal. Lots of questions above. I'm not seeing the questions. I wish I had them. Oh, here we go. Let me address some of those. Jamar Smith showing signs of life. UAB defense looks right. Jamar, AB higher floor. Yes, I say AB has a higher floor and ceiling actually over Jamar Smith. Dalen Dawkins. Is anyone? Let's see. Oklahoma receiver. CeeDee Lamb. Jeff Batted. Okay, Oklahoma receivers. Right. I'm actually going to take Lamb over Batted. I think it's close. They both can make a big play, but I'm going to go with Lamb. I just feel more confident in that play. DeAndre McNeil, he's my tight end, 20 now. Yep, he's just not the same guy with Driscoll. It's definitely a different look with the change in quarterbacks. I agree with you there. Colin Johnson, double, triple team, suffering from bad. I don't have a lot of confidence in Colin Johnson right now. If I have him right now in a full FBS league, I'm dropping Colin Johnson. I don't have a lot of confidence in that play right now. Trey Quinn. Houston, not a great matchup. Production will continue to warrant. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I remember getting your email earlier. I remember. Thanks for sending that question in here. I don't know if I would burn a red shirt on him against Houston if you have the ability to hold on to that red shirt one more week and get some guys back. I think it's worth keeping it. Let's see. Yeah. Blue. Yeah, good point there, Melton. Good question. Let's see. Guys, all right, so one thing that I want to address before I go, and I think I got to, you know what, I kind of lost my thought going over the questions, I'm sure, and I know it was an important point that I really wanted to bring home to you guys, and it had to do with start bench questions. I wish, if I could think of it, and it comes back to me, before next week's show, I'll bring it out to you. So listen, guys, that's just about it. Look, we've been up here we've been on here for an hour. Go ahead and enjoy the Week 6 games. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for the participation. Thanks for the questions. I'll look to do this again next week. I may do it an hour earlier. I'm not sure. It looks like we got a little less people on it this time than we did last week. I'll try to get on before the games start. But if you have the email, send the questions into me. I'll try to get to them before the weekend, guys. Once again, thanks for coming in, doing this this live stream on Facebook. I'm Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the College Fantasy Football site. Enjoy the Week 6 games. Good luck, guys, and I'll see you and talk to you next week.